So we'll go to the second question,
Yes.
which I believe is mine this time.
Yes, that's correct.
All righty. And this time we'll start with Carolyn. What do you say to the local resident of your district who doesn't really think that you, as a single member of the state legislature and a new member at that, can effectively influence or make significant changes to the state budget process, and just wants to hear how you are going to address his or her town's specific local needs?
I think, you know, getting anything done at the State House, and I've repeatedly heard this in my run for state representative, is, you know, as one person, you're never going to make any change up there. It's extremely difficult. You know, how are you going to do it? And I look to my local experience where all along, you know, passing bylaws for affordable housing that are so important to keeping business here in our district, stormwater bylaws and open space bylaws to protect our open space and environmental issues. All along, people said you never get it done. You know what? You need to work together. You need to set priorities. I have, fully committed to working with other representatives in the State House to, during these difficult times, take every opportunity to make some change happen that I believe, statewide, we all need to see change. And I think that's something that many representatives, especially in these difficult times, can get behind. Let's make sure we set a clear vision and work together to get it done.
Same question for Dan. Jim?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Jim, this goes back again to the core of my message. Until we get the state's fiscal house in order, the individual needs of cities and towns are always going to be in this precarious position that they're in right now, where Carolyn just challenged me on wasteful spending, and I don't know if she hasn't been listening in our previous debates, but in every single one I've talked about the fact that this year, going into the budget process, they knew they were $1 billion in deficit, and they went in the House literally behind closed doors, and they're added $220 million in additional earmarked spending. Now, whether each of those individual projects is quote-unquote wasteful or not, I don't know. I do know we didn't have the dollars for them when they were earmarked. We don't have the dollars for them today, and they're going to end up being cut, and that hurts cities and towns. When you talked about the cuts that you had to make in state government a few years ago, those were 9 Cs. Those were mid-cycle cuts. That's what we're going to deal with now, and we're going to deal with it because our legislature does not set priorities. They go behind closed doors, they line up, they tell the chair of Ways and Means their spending items, and they get them in the budget, or they get them in a bond bill, and it's a false and disingenuous and irresponsible way to govern.
Okay.
Go
ahead.
The governor today did announce cuts, and they weren't across the board cuts. They were surgical, scalpel cuts. One thing that he said would be left pretty much untouched were social programs. How do you both feel about that?
Dan, you'll go first on this one because Carolyn, I think you answered first on that.
Sure.
In other words, should they be spared, as opposed to?
Well, so social programs is such a large umbrella, and like with anything else, it's subjective evaluations of each thing. So what's a priority to someone might not be a priority to someone else. To do what the governor did today and go in after a couple weeks talking about making very difficult decisions and go in and say he's taken a scalpel to state government to deal with a $1.4 billion deficit, I'm skeptical about whether he's going to have to be back up on that podium in a few months taking more of a meat cleaver. There isn't a scalpel long enough to get to the muscle of state government. We're playing around the edges right now, and he said today he's going to make cuts that result in the cutting of 1,000 state jobs. Well, since he came into office, he's added 2,000 workers to the state workforce. So he's cut 50% back on what he added. He's cut his office budget by 10%. Well, since he came into office, he's increased his office's budget by 24%. So he's not even near back to where he started. I'm just saying there are tough decisions that have to be made. I know he's made some tough decisions, but it strikes me, and it struck me watching that press conference, he's still dancing around the edges.
We're going to have to take a scalpel.
Carolyn, same question.
Sure. First, I don't see 1,000 jobs at the state level dancing around the edges. I think that's in these difficult economic times. Those are people who are unemployed and having an even more difficult time than the rest of us. when you talk about social services, I think it's worth, I see those as sort of, divide that into core services that actually go to residents who are in need versus the cost of administering these services. And I think what we really need to do is take a lesson from business, which is my background, and look at the administrative piece of that and do whatever we can to minimize the administrative costs of delivering these services. But absolutely we need to preserve the core services that people need today. So I agree with the governor in that respect.
Okay. Michelle, I think you're next.
Okay. Now we're going to kind of look more locally, and specifically, what do you think are the most pressing local issues in the towns that you'll represent, and what steps can you take to help resolve those issues? And we're looking for something more specific than, rising property taxes and the general picture.
Okay.
More specific town issues
Carolyn,
where
you're
you can
first
help.
on this one.
Sure. Heating oil prices has been something that has come up repeatedly in my discussions with people, and the ability for us to hopefully help some of these people that are in particular need, especially our seniors, get through these tough times and be able to at least provide relief in that area is important, and an important service that government needs to provide right now. Job security is another issue. There's a lot of anxiety out there. Companies are, just the other day, Linens and Things, which is down the street in Bellingham, announced that it's going into bankruptcy. That's jobs, and that's uncertainty. We need to promote job growth here in Massachusetts. Luckily, I think Metro West, this area in particular, has a lot of opportunity to do that with an extremely educated workforce, which is what biotech companies are looking for, which is what renewable energy companies are looking for. These are the companies that have the best prospects to grow in the near future. We need to invest there so that those jobs can be created.
Okay. Same question regarding local issues for
Right.
Dan.
Sure. Well, broad-based economic development, and that is, I'm sorry, I can't possibly answer this question without referring to property taxes, because it touches everything. All the most important pressing issues at the local level are tied to the cost of living in our communities and the increased cost of living in our communities. And the way that property taxes impact that, it's, as I've said before, it's tied directly to the amount of local aid that comes from the state. Local aid has remained at a low level since it was cut in emergency fashion in 2002. When revenues rebounded, local aid did not rebound in the same way, and our legislature refused to do that. When property taxes rise, people are priced out of our communities. We end up having to import employees from other communities who can't afford to live in our communities. I think that's a huge problem in towns in our district. But it all comes back to the cost of living here. We need to increase our employer base, to increase the commercial tax base, which takes pressure off property taxes, because clearly we've seen we can't rely on increased local aid.
Well, what, Michelle?
No, I'm good.